I'm Edward Warfield. I'm the publisher at Citybiz, and I'm honored today to interview Art Putzel, who is the managing principal at Trout Daniel and Company. Welcome, Art.
Thank you so much for having me, Ed.
Can you provide an introduction to Trout Daniel and Company, your footprint, the number of brokers, the services provided?
So it's Trout Daniel and Associates, LLC. We are a successor firm to Trout, Siegel and Doyle, and for the viewers that are old enough, to Trout and Fox, which was originally founded in 1967. We are actually a family of companies, Trout Daniel and Associates and Trout Management. We do commercial real estate, brokerage, and management in an area. Our primary service area is probably about a 3-hour driving distance. We will go further afield if our clients dictate, and we have a client that we're representing right now in a good part of the United States. We probably have about 15 active agents, and then a management company that involves 3 full-time people and a couple of us wearing 2 hats. As I say, we started as a new company in 2000, at the beginning of 2009, which for those of you that have a sense of history, it was a brilliant time to start a new company because we were in the midst of the Great Recession. So when we decided to start the company, we were not yet in the Great Recession. And then when we pulled all the triggers, we found ourselves climbing out of a rather deep hole.
So can you highlight some of your recent transactions? I know you did a deal on Eastern Boulevard recently. Can you just update some of your recent deals?
Well, we did the deal, as you pointed out, at 6801 Eastern Boulevard. This was a property that we took over management and leasing of probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And we've been managing and leasing it since then. And one of my agents had a buyer that was interested in it. So we had one agent representing the buyer, 2 other agents representing the seller, and our management company involved on both sides, providing information so that the sale could take place. It fell through once about a year ago for various reasons. We did some more leasing since then, made the project even more attractive to the buyer. They stepped up. They settled at the end, I believe it was at the end of September, and we managed to retain management. We are now managing for the new owners who have extensive plans to renovate and upgrade the property. So we're very much looking forward to that. Most recently, Friday, we had a settlement on an industrial property in the Fairfield area that my partner has been involved with on a brokerage basis off and on, I think he said for 18 years, and finally managed to sell it on Friday. So things don't necessarily happen quickly in our business. Up until then, I think our company record was having an active listing on a property, and from the time we got the listing or the assignment to the time we sold it was 11 and a half years. But this one probably takes the cake. Those are 2 of the more recent notable industrial deals we've done. As I think I told you, we also represent Starbucks in the Baltimore metro area and the Eastern Shore of Maryland and Delaware. And we've done several deals with them over the last several years.
So earlier this year, you partnered with Ackerman and Company representing StorageMart in the acquisition of CubeSmart, a CubeSmart self-storage facility in Melbourne. So tell us about that deal.
We ended up representing StorageMart, who is as I understand it, the largest privately held self-storage owner in the country. We are representing them in a good part of the country, and in some areas we're doing it via a master broker, sub-broker relationship. We had a personal relationship, again, with one of the agents from Ackerman who used to be located in Baltimore. So we called him and we worked out a partnership with them, and they did a lot of work looking for sites in Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, et cetera. And they uncovered this one in Florida. We put Storage Mart together with a buyer, and they worked through it, and Storage Mart was able to acquire the property. And we've done probably 3 or 4 other deals with them already, and have several more with Storage Mart, representing Storage Mart, several more in the hopper.
And so what are some of the properties that you're representing now?
We have properties of sort of all types, all over. As I said, we pretty much operate within a 3-hour radius. So we have a shopping center in Ocean City, a shopping center in Dover, Delaware. We had some multifamily or multi-use properties in Fells Point. I think at least one of them is still on the market. Trying to think what else. Several shopping centers, several other industrial facilities. We represent a gentleman who has bought several office buildings through us over the last few years, and we represent him on an office building in Towson, one in Baltimore City on Reisterstown Road, just a variety of things. We represent a large industrial facility in Halethorpe, where we will hopefully be signing it. I think it's a 200,000 square foot deal shortly.
And how did your firm survive the challenges of COVID?
I almost feel guilty answering the question, because 2020 was the second best year we had, and 2021 will be far and away the best year that we've had. We were out of the office fully for about 3 months, and then several of us came back to the office. We were actually fortunate. We redid our offices at the end of 2019, but we did not move to an open office configuration where everybody sits in a little desk next to everybody else. We have a lot of private offices, so it worked very well for the post-COVID situation. We certainly did a lot remotely. There were a lot of Zoom or Microsoft Teams meetings. Fortunately, with our representation of Starbucks, for example, the people that we work with are not in the Baltimore area anyway, so we weren't replacing in-person meetings with Zoom, with Microsoft Teams meeting. We just continued with the Teams meetings. It did slow down certain segments of our business, and we slowed down doing retail leases. On the other hand, some of the retail centers, as everybody knows, a lot of the retail tenants are becoming service tenants, medical tenants, etc. So I can't say that COVID was a bad thing. Our management business, the financial side of it was a little more complicated doing it remotely. But fortunately, pretty much just before COVID happened, we had transitioned to an online accounts payable system. So that worked pretty well working from home.
So Art, you recently contributed a blog on what do landlords need to know about leases. So what were some of the main points in that blog?
Understand who your tenant is. We're actually going through that right now on a lease renewal with a center that I actually have a small piece of ownership in, where the tenant has been acquired by a larger company, and we're trying to determine what is the appropriate entity to have on the lease. Because on the one hand, you might have an entity that's got $100,000 in assets. On the other hand, you might have one that's got $100 million in assets. And that makes a difference. And the reason I wrote the blog was I've now been involved for about 30 years, which is a depressing thought, for about 30 years in administering leases, typically from the landlord side. And I've had the opportunity to see a lot of mistakes in leases, a lot of ambiguities in leases. So, looking for the things that tend to trip people up. And one of the things I wanted to do was to just put enough out there that says to somebody, well, maybe we ought to call an expert. One of the things you want is, if you have an attorney drawing up your lease, you want it to be an attorney who is familiar with commercial real estate. No knock against divorce lawyers. My mother did a lot of divorces, but your divorce lawyer is not necessarily the person that you want negotiating a commercial real estate lease. By way of just an example, we had a lease many years ago that called for the tenant to pay its pro rata share based on leased square footage, as opposed to leasable square footage. So that means in an 80,000 square foot center, if you had a 40,000 square foot grocery store and the grocery store went out, let's say you're a 4,000 square foot tenant, your pro rata share just went from 5% to 10% when that grocery store closed, if your lease says leased square footage. Most people, even most real estate attorneys, are not necessarily going to pick up the difference in a paragraph between the word leased and the word leasable. But yet it can be very expensive for the tenant. I'm really talking about an issue from the tenant side, but this is the kind of issue that occurs to me that you only notice it with many years of experience reading and administering leases. So my point was to give out some knowledge, but to say you really ought to have somebody who knows what they're doing look at this lease.
Let's talk a little bit about your career. You spent some time as an economic development planner with the Baltimore Regional Planning Council. Tell us about your career and the decision to get into commercial real estate.
Well, I started out with a summer job back in 19-something, working for the Baltimore City Planning Commission. And we were working on a map of downtown, and my boss at the time said, how about if we put a 40-story office building here? And I thought, that's really cool. So when I went to college, I thought I'd major in urban planning. And when I was at school, around the time that we had wage and price controls, and I thought economics is interesting too. So I ended up having a double major in urban studies and economics, which led to the idea of doing economic modeling. My first job was building a computer model, the idea of which was to project population and employment by small areas based on transportation policies. And that's what I was doing for the Regional Planning Council, which is now the Baltimore Metropolitan Council. While I was there, I was in the economic development section. So I wrote a section of the 1977 General Development Plan for the Baltimore region as a 24-year-old who, looking back on it, should not have been doing that. Because at 24, I didn't know squat, and I certainly didn't know anything about making a profit. But I worked for Regional Planning Council. We supported the local jurisdictions. I got to know the local economic development people, and left there to be the Deputy Director of Economic Development for Baltimore County, where I worked primarily with existing businesses, helping them get loans, helping them expand, understand the programs that the county could offer, and some work trying to attract new businesses to the county. And the Economic Development Commission back then was a lot smaller than it is now, so responsibilities were very broad. I took a brief detour for about 4 years to work for what is now Textron, was AAI Corporation. Worked for a small field service subsidiary and wore a lot of hats. And I had learned by going from the state to the county to AAI to a subsidiary that each time the entity I was working for got smaller and my responsibilities got bigger, and I sort of liked that. But I was concerned working for a defense contractor in the mid-'80s. I was concerned, possibly for no good reason, about what would happen if peace broke out. So I decided what I really did like was the economic development, but I liked it from the private side. So I looked at real estate companies. I ended up with Trout. The idea was that I was hired into Trout Development Company in September of 1987. And in October of 1987, we had the stock market crash, which took the development business with it, which could have cost me my job, but I've now been here 34 years. So, and as I've told people, somehow I missed a meeting of my partners, and at that meeting that I missed, I became the managing partner. So here we are. I'm sort of the guy in charge of all the other stuff. I am the broker, but I'm also the CFO, the chief information officer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's fun.
So, what are the growth plans for Trout Daniel? Do you have any on the horizon?
We'd like to ultimately buy Amazon. If that's not feasible, we would certainly like to add, maybe another 5 experienced agents, or maybe 3 experienced agents and a couple of newbies. I think at some point we would like to get back into the development business, and we'd certainly like to expand our management business. But our expansion over the last couple of years has actually been a lot having to do with the maturation of some of our existing people. That it takes a while to build up in this business. You can't. It's not the kind of business you learn in 3 months or 6 months. And also, people's needs. I always tell people, I can walk into your house tomorrow night and sell you a Cutco knife that you didn't know you needed. And just so people don't think I'm insulting Cutco, a friend of ours sold us a Cutco knife about 20 years ago, and we're still using it. So I think the world of their product. But I can't walk in and sell you a $3 million building that you don't need. So we have to be there, and we have to be front of mind at the time that you have the need. So, somebody that comes in here with a lot of contacts, they may have great contacts, but if they don't have the need at that time, it's still going to be some time before those contacts pay off. So no, it's not the kind of business you're going to come in and make $200,000 your first year. So as I say, some of our people, their contacts, their efforts matured in the last couple of years, and that's just been wonderful.
So is there any part of the Trout Daniel story that you haven't shared with us that you'd like to share?
I feel like I'm working in something that was related to my education. And my parents should have been very happy that, what they paid for, worked. Just like my son, I can draw a straight line from his major to his internships to his jobs. And that's very special as a parent. So,
Art, I want to thank you for sharing your story and the Trout Daniel story, and we wish you the best of luck going forward this year and next year.
Thank you so much, Ed.